Francisca was born in 1966 in Santomera, a municipality in Murcia, Spain. According to the information we could gather, she grew up with her parents, two sisters and a brother in a traditional town where the inhabitants were devoutly Catholic and committed to acts of charity. Although details about Francisca's early life are limited, some reports suggest that her father struggled with alcoholism. She completed elementary school and was a young girl who took great care in maintaining her appearance, especially after her brother called her fat. According to her mother, Francisca had several romantic interests during her adolescence, including a foreign boy from a wealthy family. However, this did not seem to captivate her. At the age of 18, she met Jose Ruiz Nicolas, known as Pipi, and soon began a romantic relationship with him. After dating for approximately 2 years, Francisca became pregnant with their first child, prompting the couple to marry civilly in 1987. Following the birth of their son, whom they named Dos Carlos, they moved into a house on Montesino Street in Santomera. Years later, Francisca revealed that when she first met Jose, he had a habit of hiring sex workers to participate in threesomes and other group experiences, although he attempted to abandon that lifestyle once their relationship began. However, after their marriage, Jose resumed his previous lifestyle, encouraging Francisca to engage in swinging and frequenting venues where they could connect with others who shared similar interests. In 1996, 9 years after their civil wedding, the Gonzalez couple decided to legitimize their union in the eyes of the church, celebrating an ecclesiastical wedding, accompanied by a grand celebration. That same year, their second son, Francisco Miguel, was born, and in 1998, they welcomed their third son, Adrian Leroy. While the family expanded, so did the problems, primarily due to Jose's frequent absences, resulting from his job as a long-haul truck driver. These continuous separations fostered jealousy in Francisca, who became increasingly obsessive after discovering Jose's infidelity. From that moment on, she could not shake the thought that he might still be unfaithful. In her quest to confirm her suspicions, she often disguised herself and followed him in a taxi. Arguments between the couple became a regular occurrence, both over the phone and in person. These disputes sometimes escalated into physical confrontations. According to Jose, he psychologically mistreated Francisca, leaving her feeling lonely and betrayed. In an attempt to cope with her frustration and isolation, she resorted to compulsive shopping, spending money on provocative clothing and lingerie in hopes of rekindling Jose's affection, despite her deep-seated resentment toward him. One of the most alarming aspects of Francisca's life during this tumultuous period was her descent into alcoholism and drug use, which she accessed without difficulty. It later became apparent that these substances were readily available in their home. According to Francisca's medical history, between 1990 and 1999, she suffered from nervous issues, insomnia, and anemia. In this context, the most affected individuals were their children, who found themselves without the nurturing presence of their mother. Loving mother to them, but rather one who constantly scolded and resorted to physical violence as punishment. By 2002, Jose Carlos, at just 14 years old, often found himself responsible for caring for his younger brothers, Francisco and Adrian, who were 6 and 4 years old, respectively. His responsibilities extended beyond merely supervising their behavior. He also had to attend to their feeding and hygiene. This was an unsustainable family situation, yet no one could foresee the impending tragedy. Convinced that Jose was still deceiving her and desperate to confirm her suspicions, Francisca followed him one day to Business Park, where she believed she spotted him with another woman in a cafe. This incident further strained their already fragile relationship, marking the beginning of a path leading to inevitable misfortune. Tragedy struck during the third week of January 2002, when Jose informed Francisca that he was leaving on a trip to France with his truck. In response, she threatened to inflict even greater harm on him than he had caused her. Jose left and their arguments continued over the phone, filled with complaints and threats. The family's routine remained largely unchanged during his absence, with Jose Carlos watching over his siblings as their mother sank deeper into alcohol. On January 18, 2002, Francisca stayed in bed, ill with the flu. However, by the afternoon, feeling slightly better, she took her children to the park, as was her custom when Jose was away. That night, the younger children slept with her in the double bed, enveloped in darkness. In the early hours of Saturday, January 19th, Jose Carlos was jolted awake by the screams of his siblings. Initially frightened, he chose to remain in bed, knowing that in their household, peaceful sleep was a rarity. It was common for his mother to reprimand him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was truly amiss. However, nothing could have prepared him for the harrowing discovery he would make just hours later. There are at least 3 versions of the events that transpired that morning. The first suggests that when Jose Carlos got up to awaken his siblings, he found the younger children unresponsive. But a few moments later, he discovered with horror that the children were lying lifeless in their parents' bed. How the young boy ran out in panic to seek help from his aunt and uncle, who lived nearby, while Francisca called the police. Other accounts presented a second version of events, quite similar but stating that the teenager had woken up after hearing noises that morning. This prompted him to go to his parents' bedroom, where he found the macabre scene. The third version asserts that it was Francisca who woke her eldest son early on Saturday, informing him that someone had broken into the house during the night. In his haste to alert his relatives, he was unaware that his brothers lay lifeless in their mother's bed, only learning the terrible truth upon returning home, where the police had already arrived, revealing the inert bodies of the children. From that moment on, understanding what had transpired in the Gonzalez household became paramount. The pieces of the puzzle did not align for the police officers who entered the home in response to the emergency call. They discovered the children on the bed in the master bedroom, showing evident signs of violence. The first officers on the scene noted that the children bore bruises and marks, suggesting they had been subjected to actions that obstructed their breathing. The officers immediately began gathering information to ascertain what had occurred and who was responsible for this horrific event. Naturally, the first to be questioned was the mother of the little ones, Francisca. She claimed that around 7:30 in the morning, men she identified as Ecuadorian nationals broke into her home by shattering a glass balcony, intending to steal. According to her account, she attempted to spray the intruders with a paralyzing aerosol she had on hand, but they wrested it from her, resulting in her being sprayed and losing consciousness, rendering her unable to defend her children. Sources later revealed that Francisca appeared dazed and zombie-like when the first officers arrived. However, one of the investigators from the Civil Guard remarked in a subsequent interview that while the woman seemed unsettled, she did not display the deep sorrow one would expect, and was notably preoccupied with guiding the officers' search, insisting they pay special attention to certain clues while also interviewing her and the boy's brother. The investigators spoke with other family members and neighbors in the area while the police took charge of the initial inquiries. Officials from the Murcia Social Services provided psychological support to Francisca and Jose Carlos, the survivors of the violent incident, as soon as Francisca was in a suitable state to receive help. She was then taken to the Forensic Anatomical Institute, where she underwent a medical examination to evaluate not only the effects of the paralyzing gas, but also the scratches she had on both wrists and her face. Initial reports of the tragedy indicated that when Francisca called the emergency services, she repeatedly expressed that her children had been taken from her. Meanwhile, her husband, who was out of the country, started to return to Santa Mira as soon as he was informed of the events. In her first statements, Francisca claimed that, in addition to the loss of her children, the criminals had stolen several pieces of jewelry. She mentioned that in the days leading up to the incident, she had noticed foreign men loitering around her home and had even changed the locks due to previous break-ins. During her conversations with detectives, she presented several theories, one suggesting that her husband might be involved in drug trafficking, and that the tragedy could be a result of a drug-related dispute. Although agents questioned Francisca extensively, something felt amiss. As they cross-examined her, contradictions arose and signs began to indicate that the children's mother herself could be implicated. After 12 hours of interrogation, she emerged as the main suspect in the double homicide. Discrepancies in her account became evident. She initially stated that there were 2 attackers, but later claimed there was only one. Her explanation regarding the marks on her skin further complicated her defense. She insisted that the scratches were inflicted during a struggle with the intruders, despite also stating that the assailants had been wearing gloves. Suspicion grew against Francisca, fueled by statements from Jose Carlos and some neighbors regarding her violent nature. The doubts surrounding her version of events intensified when the post-mortem examinations revealed that the children's deaths had occurred between 2 and 3 a.m., much earlier than the time frame she had provided for the alleged robbery. Forensic analysis also uncovered evidence beneath Francisco's fingernails. Under Francisco's fingernails, investigators found tissue that did not belong to the children. Subsequent DNA analysis confirmed it was his mother's. Moreover, the boy's mother exhibited none of the characteristic symptoms of exposure to paralyzing gas, such as severe throat and eye irritation. So, search of the house uncovered the jewelry she claimed had been stolen, which was hidden in the sofa cushions. Additionally, detectives collected a blonde wig and euro 9,000 in cash, leading them to suspect that this might have been a premeditated crime. As they reviewed the events, investigators recalled Jose Carlos' statements from the morning of the incident, which hinted at pre-planning. The boy mentioned that on the afternoon of Friday, the 18th, his mother had asked him to go out and buy batteries for his Walkman, a request that, when viewed in context, suggested she might have intended to create an acoustic barrier to prevent him from hearing anything while she executed her plan. But it also emerged that Francisca had instructed her maid to clean the house on Saturday morning, which raised suspicions that she aimed to eliminate any incriminating evidence. In her initial report to the civil guard, Francisca claimed she had woken up several times that night to exchange messages with her husband. She stated that she heard glass breaking in the morning and opened her bedroom door to find an Ecuadorian man wearing thin gloves. She alleged that she grabbed a paralyzing spray and a knife from her bedside table, but the assailant snatched both items away from her and sprayed the gas on her, rendering her unconscious. When she regained consciousness, she discovered her two small children lying on the bed and noticed that 3 or 4 pieces of gold jewelry were missing. One investigator later noted that doubts about Francisca's alibi arose early in the investigation, particularly because it became evident that she could not have performed all the actions she described in such a short time frame. Despite the mounting evidence against her, the case continued to unravel. Despite the evidence against her, the police did not arrest the mother immediately, allowing her to attend the vigil for her children. The following day, a large crowd gathered to mourn the loss of the boys during the funeral honors. In a poignant moment, Francisca and Jose, who had exchanged insults just hours earlier, put aside their differences and embraced each other in inconsolable grief over their irreparable loss. The entire town accompanied the small white coffins, united in disbelief at the tragedy. The faces of the mourners reflected profound sadness, but this sorrow quickly transformed into astonishment when Francisca was detained by civil guard officials after saying her final goodbyes to her children. Jose and Jose Carlos watched in bewilderment as she was placed into a police patrol car, just 2 days after the deaths of her son. Once at the civil guard headquarters in Murcia, 35-year-old Francisca faced a new interrogation, this time as a suspect in the case. Before long, she broke down and confessed to having taken her children's lives, although she sought to mitigate her responsibility by claiming that alcohol, cocaine, and tranquilizers had impaired her judgment in the hours leading up to the tragedy. She stated that upon regaining consciousness around 7 a.m., she was disoriented from the substances she had consumed and discovered her children lying motionless on the bed. Continuing her narrative, she explained that she had risen to check for intruders and, upon finding nothing, became convinced that she was to blame. Despite this strong assertion, Francisca later insisted she had not lied, claiming she initially thought men had entered her home, an idea she attributed to the effects of drugs and alcohol. She attempted to convince the civil guard that she had no memory of her actions that early morning, but authorities remained skeptical of her claims of amnesia. Around 2 a.m., Francisca entered her room, where her children were already asleep. Once there, she wrapped the charging cord of her cell phone around her son's neck with the intent to suffocate him. Although the boy fought back during the struggle, he ultimately succumbed. She then repeated the act with Adrian, her other son. Upon her arrest, media outlets reported that the motive for the crime was still unknown, although they began discussing the issues Francisca and her husband, Jose, aged 38, were facing. Neighbors provided conflicting accounts. While some claimed the couple's relationship was normal, others mentioned violent arguments that had occurred. Reports from the municipal police revealed that Francisca had filed complaints against her husband for alleged mistreatment, though she had never formalized these claims. During the investigation, Jose recounted that as their relationship deteriorated, he discovered a knife under his bed and feared that Francisca intended to take revenge. He mentioned feeling terrified when she insisted on preparing food for him, believing she might poison him. A week after the double homicide, Francisca appeared in court, where her defense attorney stated that she was being harassed by other inmates at the facility where she was held. authorities took precautions to prevent her from harming herself and to protect her from potential assaults by fellow detainees. In this context, the defense attorney suggested the possibility of transferring Francisca to a psychosis hospital for mental health evaluations, a recommendation that was eventually enacted. The forensic psychiatrists who assessed her concluded that she was a cold, calculating, immature, and self-centered woman who craved attention. They noted her authoritarian and extremely aggressive nature, along with certain traits indicative of a narcissistic paranoid personality. Meanwhile, Francisca maintained her stance as a victim of her circumstances, utilizing claims of abuse when testifying before the examining magistrate to provide context for the tragic events. She described having endured a challenging year filled with threats, suffering, and humiliation. Francisca described the suffering and humiliation she endured at the hands of Josie A., whom she blamed for the depression that drove her to seek refuge in alcohol. She claimed that Joseph forced her to attend swingers' clubs, a demand she complied with out of love. She revealed that her husband had an affair lasting a year, which concluded in early 2001, and that her family was in danger due to Joseph's involvement in drug trafficking. She recounted an alarming incident in which a stranger threatened her children's father, pointing a gun at his head. Following this episode, Francisca believed that one day she might need to escape because of her husband's illegal activities. She pointed to the blonde wig and the substantial sum of money seized by the police during the search of their home as evidence against the idea that she had premeditated the double homicide. She insisted that she had not planned the crime, arguing that if she had intended to flee, she would have done so. She explained that the thought of simulating a robbery by hiding the jewelry and breaking a glass occurred to her awakening to find her children lifeless. Although she acknowledged her actions, Francisca maintained that she did not wish to harm Francisco and Adrian, insisting that she could not remember anything from that morning due to having consumed 5 grams of cocaine, sleeping pills, several whiskeys. She argued that she had not taken their lives to hurt her husband, claiming that she would have had better opportunities to do so on previous occasions. At this early stage of the trial, Joseph denied the serious accusations made by his wife, with the exception of infidelity, stating he felt guilty for having to spend long hours away from home due to work commitments. He noted that he had started to notice the smell of alcohol on Francisca when he returned home, and that she had begun withdrawing money from their family account on a weekly basis. Joe stated that Francisca loved him unconditionally, expressing his belief that she would never have harmed their children had she not been under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He even contemplated taking her to a psychiatrist to address her issues related to their marital conflicts, which Francisca had alluded to in her statements. While Soz denied ever mistreating her, he acknowledged that there were instances where he may have let his anger slip. The national media in Spain closely followed every detail of the trial against Francisca, broadcasting José's arguments defending himself against his wife's accusations. Joes conveyed to local acquaintances that he was tired of reading sensationalized reports in the press, which he claimed obscured the truth of that fateful morning of January 19. He emphasized that the actual events were not being accurately portrayed, partly because Francisca herself seemed unaware of what had transpired. As the trial progressed, another local newspaper reported that judicial sources indicated Francisca was having an affair with a businessman from Murcia with whom she claimed to be deeply in love. This revelation was particularly contradictory, given her jealousy that prompted her to disguise herself to follow Wills without raising suspicion. Kelsey sources also suggested that Francisca and her lover met frequently, implying that this individual might have influenced her actions. Investigators discovered communications on Francisca's phone between her and this mysterious man in the days leading up to the crime, including a particularly suspicious exchange just minutes after she attacked her children. However, the content of that conversation remained undisclosed, and the civil guard denied any connection to the incident. Some sources speculated that the extramarital affair could have compounded other factors, intensifying Francisca's motivations to harm her husband through their children. Nevertheless, she firmly denied leading a double life and insisted that her lover did not exist. Francisca insisted that her lover did not exist, attributing these rumors to Josie's attempts to make her seem crazy, undermining her accusations against him. Amidst this wave of unfounded rumors, she remained in provisional custody while awaiting trial, which commenced in October 2003. During the first hearing, Francisca maintained that she had no recollection of ending her children's lives, claiming that her memory was clouded by substance abuse. She stated that when she realized her children were motionless in bed, she attempted to revive them through mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. "I tried to resuscitate my children. My pajamas got stained, so I took them off," she recounted. Francisca seized the opportunity to accuse her husband, as she had done previously, asserting that he had threatened her and attempted to eliminate her. She also denied having confessed to the crime in front of the civil guard, stating she was too intoxicated to remember whether anyone else was in the house that night. Contradicting the circulating narratives, following the tragedy, she portrayed herself as a responsible mother who had everything under control. While in jail, Francisca claimed to have stopped using drugs but expressed her unwellness, requesting that the court not release her because she did not feel capable of being on the street. During the hearings, the testimony of Jose Carlos, the couple's eldest son, was presented. He recalled that in the early hours of the morning, he heard his brothers shouting to their mother that they could not breathe. He noted that he did not investigate the situation because he assumed it was just another instance of their mother hitting them. Throughout the judicial process, the prosecution presented evidence indicating that after committing the crime, Francisca simulated a robbery. Although the defense did not dispute the facts, they argued that the substances Francisca had consumed affected her will, seeking her acquittal. However, the prosecution countered these claims with forensic reports, clearly establishing that Francisca was in full use of her mental faculties at the time of the crimes and was aware that her actions would result in her children's deaths. On October 30, 2003, Francisca was granted the opportunity to speak for the last time. If Francisca was granted her final opportunity to speak, the jury noted that the trial had been quite effective, but she expressed her confusion, stating that there were many things she did not understand and that she was overwhelmed by grief. "I so feel an enormous sorrow that will stay with me forever because I have lost what I loved most in life," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "My face cannot reflect happiness because I carry this immense sadness for all my life. I have lost my children, and even if I try to rebuild my life and have 2 or 3 more children, they will never take their place." At 37 years old, Francisca learned that the popular jury had concluded she followed a premeditated plan and that her consumption of drugs and alcohol did not impair her conscience or will. The jury considered the opinions of experts who had evaluated her, ruling out any psychological or behavioral disorders. The expert reports indicated that Francisca exhibited no emotional guilt or torment for her actions, identifying her instead as a victim of what is known as Medea syndrome, a term used to describe women who take the lives of their children as an act of revenge against their fathers. Finally, the judge announced her decision, convicting Francisca as the criminally responsible perpetrator of 2 counts of murder. She was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of 20 years in prison, totaling 40 years for the murders of her sons, Francisco Miguel and Adrian Leroy. Additionally, the court established a compensation payment of €200,000 to Jose and €40,000 to Jose Carlos. As an exemplary prisoner, Francisca was incarcerated in Sangonera prison in Murcia, where other inmates referred to her as Death because they believed she felt neither remorse nor suffering. Upon her arrival at the prison, the inmates greeted her with shouts, branding her a murderer. With the passage of time, Francisca gained the respect of her fellow inmates. Her ability to read and write enabled her to carve out a niche for herself in the penitentiary, which she also turned into a business. She offered her services to assist other women in writing the necessary documents in exchange for a fee. The penitentiary authorities held a favorable view of her as well, recognizing her compliance with the rules and her non-confrontational nature, despite her involvement in a dispute or 2. Francisca maintained her physical appearance, always keeping herself neat and tidy. It became known that shortly after her sentencing, she divorced Jose and that, while in prison, she became involved with at least 3 men who were also incarcerated. Over the course of her sentence, she was transferred multiple times, yet in each prison, she adhered to the rules, leading to her being granted permission in 2016 to spend a weekend outside. Nearly 17 years after her sentencing, in July 2020, she received a benefit of semi-liberty, nibidus the 3rd degree, a measure designed to make the prison regime more flexible, allowing inmates to serve their sentences outside of prison. According to her lawyer, Francisca had transformed into a rehabilitated, long-suffering, and mature woman considered a model inmate who aspired to reintegrate into society. Reflecting on her client's legal journey, the lawyer remarked that Francisca had struggled to defend herself during the trial, as she was then a battered woman, deceived, and battling addictions. She criticized the lack of mercy displayed by the jury, forensic experts, and judges throughout the proceedings. On the day her semi-freedom began, no family member came to pick her up. Instead, it was her lawyer who awaited her outside the prison. As the lawyer parked the car near a group of journalists, Francisca rolled down the window to announce her intent to gradually rebuild her life. She apologized, saying she couldn't speak further, but her newfound freedom was short-lived. In late April 2022, authorities revoked her third-degree status, after discovering she was not residing at the address she had provided. Since then, she has continued to serve her sentence in prison. Francisca continued to serve her sentence in prison, and although she eventually returned to enjoy some furloughs, there was a period when she was unable to leave due to the discovery that she had been using narcotics while on the outside. 2 decades after the double crime, during her first television interview with the program Punta de Mira, Francisca reiterated before the cameras that she did not remember what happened that night. "The most common question I get is about my children, and it's what I struggled to answer after all these years. I truly can't respond to that," she stated. However, during the same conversation, she revealed chilling details that contradicted her earlier claims. "I remember my youngest son, Adrian, not saying anything. I told him to turn around, but at the same time, I saw my husband and 2 heads." When asked about her eldest daughter, Francisca described her relationship with Jose Carlos at the time of the crime as normal. She then declined to discuss him further, emphasizing that the interview was meant to focus on her, not her son, Jose Carlos Ruiz. It is known that he continued to live in the house where the tragic events took place, residing there in 2022 with his wife and 2 children. The family home was put up for auction in 2002, but there were no interested buyers, even though the price was set well below its market value, resulting in the property remaining in the family. As for Jose Ruiz Nicolas, Francisca's ex-husband, it is said that he left Spain after the tragedy but later returned to the country. The last public reports about Francisca indicated that she was still serving her sentence and enjoying prison permits. There were also rumors that she had married the lawyer who defended her, though the lawyer himself denied these claims. The story of Francisca Gonzalez Navarro is, to say the least, outrageous. It is shocking not only because of the macabre crime she committed, but also due to the arguments she constructed in an attempt to evade the consequences of her actions. Many find it inconceivable that a mother could commit such an atrocity. It is inconceivable that a mother could attempt to take the lives of her children, and it is common to think that such an act is only possible in the midst of a fit of rage. However, as demonstrated during her trial, everything indicates that Francisca planned every detail of her crime, even choosing to eliminate her youngest children to ensure she would not encounter any resistance when executing her horrific act. So the truth is that everything said about the motivations and the reality of what happened falls into the realm of speculation. Only Francisca could answer these questions. Apparently, she either does not remember or has decided not to recall. Now that you know all the details of this case, what do you think? Do you believe that Francisca truly does not remember what she did that night? So were drugs and alcohol responsible for her actions, or did she act out of jealousy? We look forward to reading your comments. Dear audience, we have reached the end of another investigation. We would love to hear your thoughts on this case, as your opinions are very important to us. And remember to always express your views with the utmost respect for the victim, as well as for other viewers, and for us who will be reading your comments. Before you leave, please subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to share this video if you think someone you know might be interested. Until next time, goodbye.